Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Boxing Science Podcast. This is episode 61. And in this episode, we're going to be answering your questions about a range of different subjects regarding strength and conditioning and sports science in boxing and combat sports. We've just recently hit the milestone of 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much for your support. If you're not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button so don't miss out on any future content and you support the growth of the channel. Okay, so let's get on with this week's questions. First question from Finn Boxing. What is the best training schedule for amateur boxing? So it all depends on the availability of that amateur boxer. Is the amateur boxer full-time or part-time in terms of like their work or study commitments? Do they have the availability to train twice a day? If that's the case, it would look quite similar to professional boxing standpoint where strength and conditioning in the morning and then training in boxing in the afternoon or evening. Probably could push an amateur boxer a little bit more because we know with their sparring, they're going to be doing three-minute rounds instead of like a professional boxer when they're preparing for championship fights, they're going to be sparring 8, 10 or maybe even 12 rounds. And also they're making weight as well at the same time. So you probably could push them a little bit more, but the training schedule is pretty much similar where we're doing 2 strength and conditioning sessions a week, 3 high-intensity conditioning sessions a week, and then we have an active recovery session as well. We spread this out from Monday through to Saturday. Maybe even like some athletes like to train on Sundays. In terms of like most amateur boxers where they don't have the luxuries of training full-time, they might only be able to train once per day. And we've covered this quite a few times on the Boxing Science YouTube channel where we look at implementing and integrating the strength and conditioning into their boxing. So you can do a warm-up, mobility warm-up with some plyometrics with that, go into your main session. And then at the end, what you do is either do a strength circuit, a core circuit, or a high-intensity conditioning circuit. And with this, you change it day by day. And then across the full training week, you've got your strength and conditioning in there. This is something that we've done across the YouTube channel. So go and check out amateur boxing training, type in boxing science at the same time. Or you can have a look at our amateur boxing strength and conditioning program, which is available on the Boxing Science website. The link is in the description for more. Question from RWH166. Beyond a vertical jump, what are your favorite low-tech ways to measure improvements in power and rate of force development? So in terms of lower body rate of force development, I would always go with the jump if you're looking for low-tech solutions. And I'll explain a little bit more why as this answer goes on. But the jump would be the primary tool to be able to test lower body impulse, lower body rate of force development. If you are using force plates, the vertical jump height has a strong correlation to the amount of vertical impulse that you are creating. So that's the reason why we use the vertical jump. We normally use the orbital jump, which creates calculations based off the time off the floor to give feedback in terms of how high an athlete is jumping. This is pretty much a gold standard way to be able to test vertical jump height. You've got other variations such as output sports device, but obviously this comes at an expense. A very low expense way to test the vertical jump height would be with a MyJump 2 app, which is on your smartphone, where you can film in slow motion, put some timestamps in place, and it calculates vertical jump height. And there's a few different testing methods within this app as well. So it's a really good tool to use and encourage most strength and conditioning coaches to download this app because it's a very low cost way to be able to test jump height, and also it's quite reliable and valid as well. So go and check out the MyJump 2 app. We would look at doing the landmine punch throw. Obviously this is connected to the GymAware, which is a piece of high-tech kit, but to do this in a low-tech setting would be to use a med ball punch throw. We use a 3 kilo medicine ball and we use a tape measure to calculate the distance on how far that you're throwing it. And this is a reliable and valid test to be able to test hand speed and also like its upper body power, depending on how much involvement that you get from the lower body and from the torso. We prefer to twist that torso and the lower body because we want to replicate a punch. In terms of other tests that we use for rate of force development and strength for athletes, we use the load velocity profile. And load velocity profile we can do on a loaded jump, and we can also do it on a trap bar deadlift. With the loaded jump, we can use, again, Output Sports, so you can use the MyJump app to then create a profile and base it on the amount of jump height that an athlete gets versus the amount of load that they are jumping with. That's their body mass and weight that's on the trap bar. Then we do trap bar load velocity profiles. This is with the GymAware, where we're looking at how that velocity is maintained over heavier loads. To replicate this, you could be using RPE, for example, so rate of perceived exertion, and looking at an athlete's, basically how hard an athlete is finding a certain load at. And you can plot this along the line. Let's say 150 kilos that they're lifting. Last time it was a 9 out of 10. This time it's only a 7 out of 10. So that shows to the coach and to the athlete that actually they're finding this weight a little bit easier to do. So that's probably a low tech way to be able to test whether somebody's getting stronger and more explosive. And then just going back onto the jumps, if you don't have the MyJump 2 app, you can do vertical jump measures against the wall and being able to measure how high somebody is jumping on the wall, taking away height and arm length to then calculate what their actual jump height is. And then a very low tech way to test rate of force development would be to do a broad jump. So getting a tape measure and doing a broad jump and testing the amount of distance that an athlete's covering. Okay, got a question from Big Jesto. So as a heavyweight boxer, 112 kilos, 194 centimeters, what is the best way to perform peripheral adaptations 3 sessions per week on an air bike or non-motorized treadmill or track and field, or to be mixed? For peripheral adaptations, this is our sprint interval training, which is 30 seconds on and 3 minutes off. In that 30 seconds, we're requiring that maximum intensity, trying to maintain the reduction in that intensity towards about 60% of that maximum speed. So for example, if you're at 1,000, try and keeping it above 600 watts. With this, especially with heavy weights, I'd be saying to try and do this on the air bike. If you do this on a non-motorized treadmill being like a curve machine, what you're exposing yourself is to them high amounts of force going through the lower limb under extreme levels of fatigue. This can lead an athlete to be juicing that intensity, especially at the latter stages of the session, but then also might increase the likelihood of injury or soreness from the session. We've actually found recently with our assault bike conditioning on the 30-second maximum sprints that athletes are able to hit higher intensities, being able to maintain them for a longer amount of time, being able to repeat them on the other reps, and then also push their body to the absolute limit. So when we do the 30-second max out sprints, we take their blood sample to then put into our machine to be able to analyze lactate. And we've seen higher lactate accumulation on the air bike versus the curve. So with that, that shows that we are depleting that athlete's body as much as we can, pushing them to them higher levels of fatigue, which will then stimulate an adaptation that we need, the peripheral adaptations that we need. In particular, for you, being a heavyweight boxer, you need to be doing this on the air bike, because if you are doing this on the curve, you might not be able to hit the intensity to be able to deplete your body, but then also them high force demands that we're saying about during the curve, or definitely on track and field, them high force demands are going to be even harder for you. 30-second sprints, peripheral adaptations, we always target this using the air bike. Next question, which exercises would you recommend for wrist strengthening for boxing? So there's a range of different exercises that you can do. We can go for a very simple grip work where we're doing loaded carries, kettlebell farmer walks, which is obviously a fantastic exercise for the oblique muscles and antilateral flexion. Doing trap bar deadlifts, which are going to be challenging grip strength. Doing different things with your lower body exercises, doing something like dumbbell step-ups where you're lifting some heavy weights, having to grab the heavy weights. Sometimes the athletes are feeling it more in their grip strength rather than actual lower body. So sometimes it can be killing two birds with one stone, or getting more bang for your buck using these exercises, implementing exercises that are actually going to be challenging your grip strength. And then you're looking at like some pinch grip holds on the plates, doing stuff like pinch grabs and pinch pendulum. This will be fantastic to be able to strengthen them forearm muscles, which will help bring some more wrist stability. And then you've got a range of different exercises that you can do to challenge the wrist isometrically. So you can be doing some reverse isolated wrist extensions. And then you can also be doing some turnover work. So we can do the turnovers using the bands, or you can do turnovers using an offset dumbbell. So having the weight onto one side, doing turnovers as such, and be working over concentrically and eccentrically, or you can actually be just loading one side. So challenging it over eccentrically on the inside and then going externally out, challenging that wrist rotation. And all these exercises are all derivatives of the work that we've done with Dr. Ian Gatt, who's been fantastic, being able to deliver some workshops on the Boxing Science Conference, on the Boxing Science membership, and also our Cuts and Wraps course. If you're wanting more information about the Cuts and Wraps course, go and check out the link in the description. If you're wanting to watch more of this workshop where Ian Gatt is explaining more about wrist strengthening exercises and a lot of different variations that we just mentioned, go and check out the Boxing Science membership. The link is in the description. Next question from Butter254. Speed rope or 1 pound rope, which is better? Does the jump rope count as a plyometric exercise? So the speed rope, normally what you'd find in boxing, the 1 pound rope is something that you'd see with Thai boxing. In terms of skipping, I always say for athletes to use skipping in their boxing sessions to be able to warm up effectively. It's fantastic to elevate the heart rate, but it can also give a lot of submaximal contacts around the foot and ankle complex, which is really important to build the foundations for your more advanced plyometrics. So at Boxing Science, we really look at short ground contact time work to develop reactive strength index. This is the calculation of your contact time and your flight time. So we're wanting to have really fast, short contacts on the floor and really explosive up. Now, what we see with a lot of boxers is that their contact time, especially when we are challenging them with height, their contact time is actually a little bit too long. So what we try and do is try and reduce that contact time to improve reactive strength, foot speed, and coordination. That's why I see a lot of our plyometrics being short and sharp, starting with the basic plyometrics such as like pogo jumps. And then when we're going into our speed and coordination exercises, doing some things like RLE shuffles, crisscross, tuck jumps, everything with very short ground contact time work. And we do high volumes of this to build the foundations for more advanced plyometrics, such as the drop jump from box to box, where we're dropping from a height, short contact on the floor, and then really driving up. So they're a range of plyometrics that we use, and skipping sits underneath that. If an athlete doesn't skip and create a strong foundation of high amounts of volume of submaximal contacts, that affects our ability to work on reactive strength index in our basic plyometrics and then our more advanced plyometrics. So we need to really build the foundation for reactive strength using skipping. So with skipping, I would do 3-minute rounds, maybe 1 or 2 before going into your boxing. Let's go on to which kind of rope that I'd use. I would use the speed rope over the 1 pound rope. And the reason why is because we're looking for ground contact time of under 200 milliseconds for our reactive strength index work. During skipping, we've actually put on the output sports device whilst doing skipping. The contact time is actually a little bit longer whilst doing the speed rope. We don't mind this because it'd be very difficult to keep the contact time down for that amount of reps because it's going to be really challenging on the calf muscles. But we're showing that if you're doing it a little bit heavier on a 1 pound rope, that contact time is going to be a lot longer. So we're actually not meeting the requirements for that foundation for our plyometric exercises. So I'd always go for the speed rope over the 1 pound rope. Now I see why Thai fighters might use a 1 pound rope because they have to be kind of standing on one leg and not as reactive as what boxers are through the feet. The 1 pound rope can actually still have an impact on the Muay Thai, but for boxing, I would be looking to use the speed rope. What type of test do you use to make a functional screening for boxing? How do you work on the restrictions you have seen during the tests, static stretching, dynamic stretching during the warm-up, and after the session. So functional movement testing for boxing is really important to highlight areas for improvement in terms of like muscular imbalances, where you're strong and tight, where you're weak, where you're unstable as well. So it's really important to do. However, at Boxing Science, we just look at 2 different exercises. That is the overhead squat and the single leg squat assessment. And the reason why is that functional movement assessments can be quite time consuming, and we've got a lot of things that we need to be covering within our strength and conditioning sessions, particularly our testing battery. Our Boxing Science testing battery takes about 2.5 hours to do, starting on our jump assessments, our punching power, rotational strength, grip strength, and also then working onto our physiological profiling as well. So adding a functional movement screening on top of this be really time consuming for people to do. Also, functional movement screening can be quite subjective sometimes. If an athlete is sore, they might not score as well. If it's a qualitative assessment, such as like an overhead squat, a more qualified practitioner will be able to spot other things compared to less qualified or less experienced practitioner. Even sometimes people's perceptions on what is good movement versus what is bad movement, it becomes quite blurred. So I'll try and keep it very simple in terms of doing the overhead squat and the single leg squat assessment. Then if an athlete is coming in with an issue, maybe like they've got an elbow injury or they've got something going wrong at the knees, I then go into more specific tests around the area that that athlete wants to be working on. But the main 2 things that we use is overhead squat assessment and single leg squat assessment. The overhead squat assessment is pretty good, looks at an athlete's hip mobility, stability, the core stability and postural stability, and also overhead range of motion and imbalances between left and right side, particularly around the shoulders. And from this, we can then highlight different things that an athlete needs to work on. If their overhead squat is really bad, they're leaning forward and the shoulders are coming forward, they might not be ready for key compound lifts such as the squat and the deadlift. If they have really good posture during the squat, that's pretty good, they can do compound lifts, but then we might see an imbalance between left and right side in their shoulders, or they might be more trap dominant rather than kind of rotator cuff dominant. We've actually done this overhead squat with a lot of fighters now, and we can find like 4 key areas that an athlete needs to work on. And that is hip mobility, shoulder mobility, rotational mobility, and glute strength. And with these 4 sections here, we then divide some exercises that target this, and we put this into our mobility warm-up. There is specific things that an athlete can work on, and they can put in some bespoke movement and mobility exercises to help work on these, and we put that maybe in a warm-up or integrate into a boxing session, integrate into their strength conditioning sessions as well, or just do it as part of their active recovery routine. But mainly what I say to boxers is that no matter what happens on this overhead squat assessment, you can more or less improve it by doing our Boxing Science mobility routine more consistently. So we get our athletes doing the Boxing Science warm-up routine that is targeting these 4 core areas in terms of rotational mobility, shoulder mobility, hip mobility, and glute strength. And we get them to do this every single session, whether it's a boxing session, a strength and conditioning session, a high intensity conditioning session. The reason why we do this mobility routine so much is because I say that it's a little bit like a balancing act. Boxing, even though it's a dynamic sport, is quite restricted in terms of its movement in the stance and in the guard, throwing thousands of punches, which is an anterior dominant movement. We're going to create a lot of imbalances, and also the difference between lead shoulder and rear shoulder. You're going to be more active with this lead hand than the rear hand. These kind of mobility issues are going to be more and more persistent the less mobility that you do. So let's say you're in this stance, a stance and guard for hours across the week, throwing thousands of punches, and then you only do like a little bit of mobility here and there. This balancing act is going to be more lopsided towards the movement and mobility issues caused by boxing training. But if you start doing your mobility training, doing that quite consistently across the week, going into your boxing sessions, doing it in your S&C sessions, doing it in your high intensity conditioning sessions, just going to create a little bit more balance. You're not going to be 100% the perfect mover, but you're going to be able to reduce that balance a little bit more. And this helps athletes move better and get stronger and eventually punch harder. But most importantly, reduce that likelihood of injury. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Boxing Science Podcast. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for watching or listening to the podcast. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button so don't miss out on any future content, and help the growth of the channel so we can bring you even bigger and better content in the near future. Thank you very much for watching. See you on the next episode of the Boxing Science Podcast.